Next up for SciCon, we have Eugene Leventhal, who's going to be presenting on decentralized research centers. Eugene is the head of operations at the Smart Contract Research Forum, otherwise known as SCURF, which is a grant-funded organization with the mission of increasing facilitation between academia and industry around Web3 research. Prior to SCURF, Eugene worked at Carnegie Mellon as a project manager, and he holds a master's in public policy from Carnegie Mellon and also a BS in finance and psychology from NYU. Eugene, thanks for joining.
Hey,
Eugene.
Pat, hey, Ricardo, hey, everyone. How are y'all doing today? Excited to be here.
Doing great. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, of course. It's been a great run. So happy to be part of the first SciCon. Yeah, really exciting to be part of it. So hello, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Eugene from the Smart Contract Research Forum, or SCURF as we prefer to call it, SCRF. And I'm going to quickly present on, hopefully it's showing the right screen, which is this presentation on SCURF and Decentralized Research Center. So I'm just going to keep going, assuming it is, unless someone stops me. But yeah, today I'm just going to quickly set some context on SCURF to kind of lay the groundwork of why we're going into and exploring this whole idea of decentralized research centers. But the bulk of the 10 to 15 minutes that I want to spend speaking on this idea before opening it up to Q&A are really going to be focused on the DRC concept themselves. So SCURF's direct mission is advancing research focusing on the Web3 space. How we're going about this is through the avenue of facilitation. So thinking for people who live mostly in theory versus people who live mostly on the engineering side, how do we create, and here we kind of crudely broke it down either as researcher builders or academia industry. And it's sort of this crude breakdown, but there's the people who are more kind of focused on the pure theoretical versus the applied engineering side. And we're trying to figure out what are all the forms of facilitation in between that can help catalyze and advance an overall research space. And so the starting point for us was research discoverability. How do we actually help make research coming out of academia more accessible for those in industry? So we started building our forum. We have this content type called Research Summaries, where we issue grants to primary authors or to other researchers to summarize research. So we curate a weekly list called Research Pulse of sort of the research that has been hitting Google Scholar in a given week. And from that, we actually do directly reach out to individuals and see if they would like to summarize it. And again, making their research more accessible through these kind of research summaries. But that's sort of really just the starting point for us, where we're actually looking to head from there, right? And if you kind of zoom out and what is the overall question that we're kind of grappling with here? Part of it comes down to knowledge capture and dissemination of Web3 research with a bias for action. Right. So how do we help understand what research is out there and get it to the right people and not just sort of, in their inbox of like, hey, you might want to read this thing, but really thinking what additional forms of facilitation, events, granting, operational infrastructure, or what else needs to be in place to support there. So, on the capture side, I already mentioned we have different grants. We work with different research groups. On the dissemination side, we're trying to think through our forum, or we've been building our forum rather, and we're trying to think through what to add in addition to our forum and our actual community. And we're pretty much thinking of it in this way where we have the content that hits the pipeline, that hits our forum. We have the engagement around it of the community that we're building of various researchers and those who are research curious to be able to actually interact with these ideas. And then how do we let the world know about all these activities and build more of the kind of strategic partnerships necessary to make sure that all of this information that especially is initially coming heavily from the academic side is getting to the right folks in industry as well. And obviously there's kind of an operational underpinning to all of this, which I'll touch back on in a moment with the actual concept of DRCs. So what we're effectively doing is a layer across research areas within Web3. We're trying to think of what are the existing networks within governance, within cryptography, within scaling, within oracles, within security, within all the relevant Web3 research domains. How do we identify who's actually doing what, and then think of the ways to start connecting across them? So in turn, SCURF is kind of this layer across all of these individual domains. And as we've been thinking about how to enter these individual domains, we started coming up with this idea of decentralized research centers. and a quick tangent into the idea of networks and specifically impact networks to also help contextualize here. I mean, folks can see here, a definition of networks and the idea of an interconnected group or system. And, these can exist sort of on the biological level, on the social level. There are obviously technological systems, social media and social networks a lot of the time can frequently get thought of in the context of social media, as opposed to the fact that we are just social creatures who naturally live in networks. And, the language here is important. So I want to reframe networks as these interconnected systems of humans, and especially on the biological and social side of the humans as the individual nodes and who's doing what. So I don't know if anyone here has had a chance to read David Ehrlichman's book, Impact Networks, which is a great one. And we actually have a YouTube video on our on YouTube with the SCURF account, where we actually had David come in and lead a community call. And we did a reading group on this book because we thought it was very relevant for what we're doing at SCURF. Because here the whole idea of an impact network is sort of combining, this thriving community with a healthy operational focused organization. So how do you have sort of the heart and soul of a community while having the actual operational efficiency of an organization? And especially where I really appreciate these ideas of shared principles, self-organization, and trust, while still having a common aim, an operational backbone, and a bias for action, which is a phrase that I very much enjoyed and got from this book. And so here it's important to keep in mind as we're thinking of these impact networks, and especially in the context of research, it's important to keep in mind different networks depending on their focus area and desired area of impact. They're going to be effective at different scales, right? In a certain environment, maybe a network needs to be 20 people. In a different environment, that might need to be 2,000 people, depending on the nature of the goal and what is actually sought after there. And very importantly, these networks don't need to accomplish everything in their entirety. It's in my own belief, I'm why I get excited about DAOs and Web3 is the whole idea of, well, how can we actually get people closer and closer to very focused areas of meaning and impact, and then think of networks and layers of infrastructure around it to empower these things. All right, so I realized I was a long-winded couple of minutes on just context, getting to the actual idea, but I thought it was important putting that in place, because for us at SCURF, we see these decentralized research centers as sort of this layer of these knowledge ecosystems. What are all the components of a very focused area, right? Say we're just talking about a single research domain, like governance, like cryptography, right? Single intellectual domain, so to say, or research domain. And so as we're thinking of these, there are these four kind of components of this network layer that we're thinking of. And culture is sort of the thing that binds them all together across all of these. Because as you actually start unpacking what these mean, right, what is an intellectual layer? Well, that consists of research networks, review networks, publication networks, right? Today, a lot of the time, review and publication are actually combined, right? If you're trying to publish in ACM or Elsevier or any of the major journals, right? You're getting review as part of your publication. There actually isn't much independent review that is irrespective of publication. There are the social layers, which has community, communication, and learning, right? Who's actually just communing around this, who's clearly trying to tell the world what's happening from either a media advocacy or explanation perspective. And then there's kind of the learning pathways of, well, who's creating the next generation of folks contributing to this overall domain area. And then, none of this would be possible without some money being able to fund these actual activity and the times of the people and paying for the time of the people doing this work. And very importantly, this operational layer, I think, is one that frequently gets neglected because ops is usually something that exists within a single organization. And I think that open source communities show some very interesting precedents and kind of examples of what, open operational networks can look like, because effectively, right, no open source project would actually work if there wasn't some kind of operational layer around that of people actually focused on project management and who's doing what, and let's roadmap and coordinate. So it is very important to not just have the folks who actually want to get their hands dirty in the research or do the validation and formal publication, but there's a lot of other elements that go into what we're dubbing as sort of a knowledge ecosystem within a single domain. And so what does it mean to actually operationalize one of these? Because it's great to have theoretical ideas, but what does this actually look like in practice? So it's important to define the scale, the focus, as mentioned, the ops and funding, and then to start putting together all of these different networks. Let me just jump into a concrete example. So right now, the Dow Research Collective, MetaGov, and SCIRF, we are working together. I'm putting together a Dow Research Hub, which from the SCIRF perspective is the first time that we're collaborating with a group of folks on building a decentralized research center specifically in the direction of DAOs and governance. Right, so the name of this specific center, so to say, is called the Dow Research Hub. Again, just DAOs and governance within Web3, and we're currently seeking some funding to fund some grad students. Because while we have been already pulling together the existing research networks, and we hosted an event at DevCon, and we just had a faculty member, a former faculty member from UC Dublin, who's written the ethnography of the DAO. He actually worked with us to organize a Web3 workshop the other week, where we had around 60 or 70 academics coming together. We're putting together these three organizations on this slide. We're putting together a DAO day, so to say. I'm forgetting what the formal name is that we decided on in the end. But there's the 3-day Stanford conference at the end of August. We're adding on September 1st a focus just on DAOs and governance. We're also working on for DevCon in October. We're going to be working with a wide variety of organizations putting together a governance and crypto economics community hub there. And then in January, we're actually working with a group of academics to put together an academic conference, hopefully at UCSD, at UC San Diego, in early January, which would be a lovely time for those of us who are living in cold climates to escape to San Diego for a little bit. But regardless, right, we have this series of events where we're going mostly academic, mostly industry, and we're kind of ping-ponging between the two. And we're able to tap a wide variety of folks who are already in the space. To that, we want to add postdocs or grads who are already embedded at universities. We're talking to Stanford and Carnegie Mellon and a few others right now about possibly funding actual students there too, who can take data from these industry networks and collaborate with other university and academic focused researchers, and coordinating with these funding and ops layers to actually get more public facing activity going on this and actually sharing with the world, and not just, increasing the volume of overall research, but really thinking about that facilitation, right? How do we go from having ideas to getting the ideas to the people who need them? And I think DAOs is an interesting one to highlight, because I know when I got into the space in 2016, there were a lot of folks, myself included, who on the DAO side got very excited in this new structure and it's going to change everything. And then people were like, oh, have you ever heard of a co-op? And again, myself included, were, wait, sorry, what's a co-op again? Right. And that's a problem, right? People who are building DAOs absolutely need to know what a co-op is. Just like today, people doing smart contract audit security should be aware of general cybersecurity primitives and standards in the Web 2 domain, right? It's not bad to learn from previous precedent. So a lot of the time, the people who are actually building a product, they don't even know what is the full relevant set of information to them, right? So this facilitation isn't, oh, you're working on problem X, here's all the problem X related research. It's a much broader problem where the actual confines of what is relevant research is very ephemeral and fluid. It changes over time and is not something that is static. So I know I'm getting close to the 15-minute mark, and I want to make sure to leave some time for questions. So here, I just want to show that, for a decentralized research center, the way we're thinking of it as SCIRF is what we've been doing has been this kind of cross-domain knowledge network layer, right? It's clunky. There's got to be better terms for it. We just haven't thought of it yet. So work with me. If you have ideas of how to better package some of these, please let me know. And we are looking for folks to collaborate with. So please feel free to reach out if any of this is of interest to you. But what SCIRF has been doing is this sort of foundational, right? We're not just focused on DAOs or on cryptography or on security. We care about Web3. So we're trying to be that foundational layer across all of these areas. But the challenge is, right, if we go to a tenured security faculty member and a cryptography faculty member and someone doing some version of DAOs and governance, sure, they would love to chat with each other, but they need to go deep in their own domain. So here, this idea of SCIRF as this kind of foundation upon which these pillars into very specific dedicated topics can be built. And so the Dow Research Hub is the first attempt at building one of these decentralized research centers, these concrete focused pillars in a very specific direction that brings together all of those individuals. We're also doing a peer review experiment at the moment, but that's already beyond the scope of this presentation. But if anyone is interested, I'm happy to share more about that. But pretty much with the Dow Research Hub, as mentioned, we're already starting on providing operational support. We've hired some folks into what we're calling community cross-pollinators. So what is the actual human layer of additional cross-pollination in addition to making the information available and trying to figure out what are the other resources that need to be available there. We're already thinking of what are the future decentralized research centers we're going to work on and who we're going to partner with. And at the end of the day, we absolutely have an infinite amount more of open questions than we do concrete answers. We are fundamentally wading into uncharted, or I don't want to say uncharted as if no one has ever thought about this, but no one has thought about systematizing this as a public good, right? There are versions of this, and we're trying to learn from very different innovative research environments and, the Bell Labs and the Xerox PARCs and the DARPAs and everyone else who's kind of created these very interesting and intriguing research and just innovation and mindset change environments. But what does it actually look like when you have that in a decentralized fashion without one organization sitting in the middle of it? And so again, there's a lot going on here. And at the end of the day, we are absolutely excited to have more folks to collaborate with, to speak with about this. And, it's been a pleasure from my perspective and from our perspective as an organization and connecting with the Research Hub community. And we've had a couple of joint calls on peer review and everything else. So yeah, very much kind of open call to action is if any of what I just said interests you, please reach out. More than happy to chat and to see how we can collaborate. But I will stop there to at least leave a couple minutes for Q&A.
Hey, Eugene, this is amazing. Thanks so much for the presentation. I love that you all are focused on like a bias for action with the research that you're focused on, like trying to build a product with the DAO attached. I almost feel like I could spend 5 to 7 years just to learn about like community governance, like get a PhD in how to actually like operate a DAO, but like obviously do not have the time for that. So it's really cool that you guys are putting together like an organization that can help like make recommendations on how to like improve these sort of like community DAOs. So I guess like from like the couple of years that you guys have been working on SCIRF, what's like a recommendation that you've made where you've actually seen organizational change, from this like research that has a bias to action?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we're still kind of, we've been around about 1.5, 2 years, and we're still figuring out the line. How much are we recommending specific courses of action versus giving people information and letting them choose their own adventure? Currently, we're much more on the latter, especially with the general ethos of Web3, right? We don't want to be a centralized, we're the ones that tell you how to DAO right or how to cryptography right or how to do something like that. Nonetheless, it's been really exciting to see how, I think for us, just seeing how we're in the lucky position where we get to see a lot of people thinking about the same thing at a similar time point. And they're also focused on whatever their direct incentives are, whether it's building a new product, trying to work out an idea, that we just get to be, like, hey, knock on the door, like let's pick our heads up and look across because there's 4 or 5 of you doing the exact same thing. So let's get on a call together and actually discuss what this looks like. And, we're also able to do some kind of closed door convening as well for folks that want to gather but are not as comfortable doing it publicly. And I see there was a question in chat on peer review. So maybe I'll segue with an example and then talk about the peer review side of things for a moment. But, around peer review specifically, we have our actual experiment, which Timothy, I'll answer your question in a moment. We have the actual experiment, we're building community, and we're building this knowledge repository. So, in my own very blunt, overly critical, I'm always one to criticize myself and whatever I'm involved with much more aggressively than I would do for others. I still think we have a far way to go. I can come up with a few little examples here and there, but at the end of the day, I still personally think we have a very long road ahead of us in terms of truly seeing that kind of deep acceleration. And part of the challenge is even knowing what's the right information to get to people, combined with the right culture, combined with the right facilitated interaction and workshops. So we're doing a lot of these things individually. Like we've had some little things come across of like, yay, this happened thanks to an interaction with SCIRF. But on that kind of systematic level, I'm not seeing it at the scale. And Timothy, just to quickly answer your question on the peer review side, basically, we're doing a super basic process. For now, round 1 is just on DAO and governance related research, where we're not using any special tooling, nothing like that. We just want to effectively establish a baseline process for what is the minimum amount of review to happen for something to have considered having gotten open peer review, where we actually compensate the reviewers. So those are the major differences of what we're doing right now. I'll, as soon as I'm done chatting and once the next person's up, I'll drop a link in chat with a little more information about our experiment so you could learn, so you could read up on that, and happy to chat later as well.
Yeah, so I guess just to like say one way in which SCRP has positively impacted ResearchHub, you all have advocated for like kind of like cross-pollination in contributors among DeSci projects. And so I think that's really nice in that like kind of every project is doing DAO governance in their own way at the moment. And when you have contributors who are part of like different communities, you can kind of learn what works best and implement, based on others like trial and error. I know like some of like our best kind of DAO community governance processes have come from just ResearchHub users who have stepped up and said, hey, Pat, you guys are not doing this well. Like there's like great precedent in other projects that I'm a part of that like could really improve like how ResearchHub is operating. And so we have awesome people like Jeff and Ricardo who have, spent a lot of time in a lot of Discords, like learning on like how governance can operate and have improved ours. So yeah, the cross-pollination I think is really important, and like I'm grateful for your organization kind of helping to champion that. I guess another question that I have is like, I love the idea of decentralized research centers. Like we had a couple talks yesterday on decentralized clinical trials. And I think in general, just the ability for the average person to start doing molecular biology experiments is really on the rise. Like it's getting cheaper and easier every year. I guess, do you have any like examples of decentralized research centers that have kind of popped up organically in the past? Like something, that comes to mind when you brought that up was like the Polymath project, where like a bunch of mathematicians just randomly jumped into a forum and started figuring out like really complicated math proofs. So yeah, just curious if there's any like pre-existing organizations that you all draw inspiration from.
Yeah, it seems like the ones that I know, like for Moz Library is also one that I get really excited about from a different direction of just like annotating white papers and how to make research more understandable. The Polymath one is a great example of just these very focused, deep but narrow, right? It's not a group trying to solve all the world's problems. They're looking at very specific mathematical problems. And, I'm forgetting some of the other ones in the world of some of the other hard sciences and bio and medicine and some others. And I know you and I have also talked about just how subreddits, like even there are some subreddits that are actually, like Ask History is one of my favorite, or Ask Historians, I think it is one of my favorite subreddits. And, there is a lot of great knowledge on there. I think the challenge with a lot of these groups is they seem to operate massively well when there happens to be a certain threshold of motivated enough individuals, because the sad reality is, to my knowledge, at least, a lot of those communities are purely volunteer passion based. And that's a beautiful thing, but you can't expect 20,000 people around the planet to give 10 hours a week to something that's purely volunteer, especially if someone at the end of the chain is somehow actually finding a way to monetize that knowledge, and something comes out of that and they adjust the model, which goes into a product, which goes into making someone a billionaire. And right, the fact that there isn't that feedback loop back into open communities, I think, is one of the things that's been undercutting this, because there's a lot of examples, right? Even stepping away from the research communities, there's a lot of examples of tech companies that have multi-billion-dollar evaluations at the time when they have 10, 20, 30 people, because they're mostly using open source tooling, and then they don't kick anything back to the open source community once they get invested in. So to take that question slightly differently and thinking of what do we need to see more of these communities, we need to actually think of whose shoulders are we standing on to have gotten here? And if we are in a position to have some extra capital, how do we make sure to divert it to those communities so that more of those things can happen? Because I know, having worked at CMU also, there's a lot of people who come in with those stated intentions, and then you get a totally different thing once you're in the middle of it. And you realize like, oh, you're really just working for your one main funder to solve a problem that they're having. And that's just a very different feel that does not feel as pure on the intellectual side.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. So I guess another question that I have is like for the year and a half or two that SCRP has been around, like I feel like DAO governance and Web3 in general is like a super early stage field. And it's almost like every week there's like a new perspective on the best way to like help, DAOs run effectively. Can you talk about like any like evolving perspectives that you've had? You mentioned like you started thinking about this in 2016. Like kind of, yeah, how have your thoughts changed over the last like 5-6 years?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first got into it, I was just, I feel like many people who are initially enamored by the possibilities and look at how great it is, and people will work together and that will solve all of our problems of humaning. And yeah, just through both the journey through DAOs and keeping an eye on the space and my own mental health journey in parallel have had some interesting combined learnings. And one of them is that humans don't like changing, and change is very hard. And some of these stated desires and ethos of DAOs, and how we're all going to be in these leaderless environments and we're all going to know when to step up and step back, all these things involve a certain level of personal change that I don't see as being systematized and following anywhere as close to, the interest in what's going to the moon this week or something like that. So I think in terms of DAOs and governance, right, I'd say through DeFi summer, it was predominantly copy paste. Governance was like a 12th order consideration for most organizations. It's like, governance, forget governance. We don't know how we're scaling. We don't know our consensus mechanism. We don't know this. We don't know that. Like, we have all these tech issues. Forget the people. We need the tech first. And between the DAO, though that was in 2016, I don't think that actually changed a lot of people's mentalities. That just made DAOs a dirty word for a while. And I know that because I was working on a DAO project on EduDAO, not the one that launched about a year ago. It was a different EduDAO focused in the Bronx. And like, everyone loved what we were doing until we actually had to sign legal papers, and then the lawyers would get scared off because there was no clarity on crypto at that time. But anyway, so a lot of governance was copy pasta through DeFi summer. Once all of a sudden DeFi summer in 2020 took place, and all of a sudden, what was a maybe a couple $100,000, $1 million treasury turned into $1 billion treasury within 6 to 12 months following, all of a sudden there was a massive focus on governance, and everyone was kind of racing to figure out what is the new version. I'm personally super excited by what Optimism is working on with their bicameral governance structure. And I just think that we need to keep evolving I don't want to say keep evolving the complexity, because I don't want to imply that complexity for complexity's sake is a good thing, but we are dealing with an inherently complex problem. And I currently do not see how we can have a super easy solution to this, because at least we need to have more experimentation to suss out the nuances of exactly what are the problems we need to work through. And that's where, like, I'm really excited to see Optimism, because something I've been thinking about for the last 6 to 12 months has been, well, how do we actually mix, gated expertise with the masses of whoever wants to focus on whatever without needing to, like, be this high to ride kind of thing? And how do you have that mix of everyone is welcome, but at the same time, not everyone is dedicating the same time and attention to these core problems? So why does a person who spends 3 seconds here have an equal vote to the person who does nothing but think about this problem and really wants to see this place evolve over 20 years, whereas some of the people here for 3 seconds are just worried about going to the moon? So it's very interesting to also see. And I think now that DeSci is much more of a thing than it was 6 to 12 months ago, right? This is where it's going to be interesting to compare DeFi governance with, say, ReFi DeSci governance, right? What's different when the fundamental intrinsic motivation towards the project changes? Like, I don't know how many people, and this is just my own bias because I'm not intrinsically motivated by financial products, right? Maybe some people are. Maybe some people do wake up in the middle of the night being like, oh, it's a better algorithm for making some more money. And like, I just can't empathize because that's not me, but I'm sure someone is wired differently like that. But I do know a ton of people who do have that kind of thing of like making knowledge better, like solving these massive problems that don't have a clear way out. So I do think that this new experimentation of the bicameral, of using soulbound tokens in different versions or non-transferable NFTs, of using much more intricate ways of actually tracking contribution and proportionally weighting to either expertise or contribution, while still also giving a pathway for anyone who wants to hop in and still get involved. I think that is a very interesting domain. And I think we're going to need a couple of years of experimentation. And I know, at least I'm forgetting the names of some of the other projects, but I know a few folks have started running their own experiments based off of what they're seeing in Optimism. So I'm really excited in the bicameral direction in those experiments, and in specifically in terms of soulbound tokens, non-transferable NFTs, and more reputation tools to improve how we work together.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for expounding. And for everybody in the audience too, Eugene's done like a whole lot of work helping to bring all the DeSci projects together. So he's just been like an incredible asset, I think, to the field, and helping to like have everyone be pushing in the same direction. So thanks again for the talk and for kind of expounding on these decentralized research organizations.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, pleasure to be part of it. If anyone ever wants to chat, please feel free to find me on Twitter or elsewhere.